My wife sold my property while I was deployed, so I invited a new woman into my life. What happened next will shock you. The house is mine now, Derek. You can take whatever fits in that bag. And honestly, a court is going to love hearing about a man who was never really present anyway. She said it the way people say things they have been practicing. Not loud, not broken, precise. Like a tool she had sharpened over a long time and was finally getting to use. I set my duffel down on the floor of the kitchen I had paid for, in the house I had purchased with 11 years of deployment savings and military discipline, and I looked at my wife, at Renee, for what I already understood would be one of the last times I would look at her without a lawyer in the room. My name is Derek Calloway. I am 38 years old, born and raised in Huntsville, Alabama, the son of a man who built equity with his hands, one board at a time, and a woman who spent 30 years teaching other people's children how to read. I enlisted at 19. I served 3 deployments, 2 in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, and I came home from each one quieter than I left, which people who don't know me often mistake for something being wrong. Nothing was wrong. I was paying attention. The thing Renee said about the house, that it was hers now, I already knew was a legal impossibility before the words finished leaving her mouth. What I did not yet understand was the full shape of what she had done, the particular architecture of the betrayal, how far back it had started, and how many people had helped along. That understanding would come in stages over the following weeks, the way damage assessments come after a blast. First the visible, then the structural, then the things beneath the foundation that nobody thought to check until it was almost too late. But here is what I need you to understand before any of that. I set that duffel down with care. I did not drop it. I did not slide it or kick it or let it fall. I placed it the way you place something that contains something important. And I watched Renee watch me do it. And I watched her see the care. And I watched her read it as weakness, the way she had apparently been reading my patience for the last several years of our marriage. She was wrong about almost everything. But she was most wrong about that. What surprised me when I walked into that kitchen was not what she had done. I had seen enough of the signs before I boarded the plane for my 3rd deployment that I had taken steps I will describe in time. What surprised me was the confidence, the absolute absence of doubt in her posture, in her voice, in the way she stood there in the kitchen of my house and told me to take what fit in my bag. She had no idea what I was carrying in it. That gap between what she assumed and what was actually true would become the entire story. I want to tell you how it started. Not the end of it, not the legal part, not the settlement. I want to tell you how a man coming home from a war zone walks into the wreckage of his own life, and what he does when the wreckage turns out to be survivable. I flew home on a Tuesday. My mother, Sandra, met me at the airport in Huntsville before I drove to Clarksville, and she held my face in her hands the way she has done since I was a boy, and she looked at me for a long moment without saying anything. Then she said she needed to show me something at the house. I told her I already knew something was wrong. She asked me how long I had known. I told her since before I left. 2 days later, I was sitting at her kitchen table with a manila folder in front of me and a cup of coffee going cold to my right, and my mother in the next room giving me space I didn't ask for but needed anyway. Inside the folder was a copy of a quitclaim deed, my name on it, my signature on it. Except I had never signed it, never seen it, never agreed to what it transferred. The Huntsville duplex I had purchased at 34 years old with 8 years of deployment savings and a VA loan I had earned through the specific sacrifice of being away from everything I care about, transferred, while I was overseas, to a shell LLC registered in Tennessee that I did not recognize and had no part in creating. I read it twice. I closed the folder. I picked up the coffee even though it was cold. The internal experience of that moment was not rage. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect rage, and what I felt was something closer to the sensation of a tactical assessment completing itself. The map of what had happened becoming suddenly, fully legible. I had suspected something was being moved. I did not know the exact shape until that folder. Now I did. My mother came back in and sat across from me and asked if I was all right in the way mothers ask when they already know the answer and are really asking something else. Whether it'll be all right, eventually, over time, in the long run. I told her yes. I meant it. Then I reached back into the duffel. The same bag I had carried off the plane, the same one I had placed with Carol on Renee's kitchen floor 2 days before, and I removed a smaller envelope. I set it on top of Sandra's folder. I did not open it in front of her. I just said one thing. I said, she didn't know about the notary. My mother looked at the envelope, and then looked at me and did not ask me to explain. She has always understood that I tell things in order and that the order matters. What I need you to understand about the duplex, about what it meant to me specifically, separate from its legal value, is that my father James Calloway taught me something when I was 12 years old that I have never once forgotten. We were painting the front porch of our house on Meridian Street. The two of us, on a Saturday in August when it was hot enough to make the paint dry before the brush finished its stroke. He stopped in the middle of a board and looked at me and said that land is the only thing nobody can manufacture more of. He said everything else could be replaced, reproduced, inflated, deflated, argued down to nothing. But the ground under your feet is the ground under your feet, and the person who holds the deed holds something permanent. He said that the most important thing a man in our position can do is put his name on a piece of land and defend it. I thought about that moment every time I sent a deployment check home. I thought about it when I signed the VA loan paperwork. I thought about it when I drove to the Huntsville duplex for the first time as its owner and stood in the driveway for a long moment just understanding what I had done. I also thought about it 6 months before my third deployment, when I started noticing the signs that Renee had stopped believing in what we were building together. It didn't announce itself. It never does. It was small things behavioral tells that someone who wasn't paying attention would have missed entirely. She started angling her phone screen away from me when I refilled her coffee in the morning. A half-second adjustment, habitual, practiced. She moved her car keys from a hook by the door to inside her purse. Once, on a quiet Sunday when we were sitting in the kitchen, and I mentioned the duplex needed a new water heater, she called a headache and then looked immediately at the window instead of at me. The way people look away from things they have already internally categorized as someone else's problem. None of that was proof. All of it was data. I am a man who was trained to watch environments change without tipping his awareness. I did not confront Renee with any of it. I filed it. I let the pattern continue completing itself. And when I had seen enough of the pattern to understand its shape, I drove to Huntsville alone, 2 weeks before my deployment date, and I met a woman named Carol Sims at the duplex. Carol was a licensed, state-registered notary. I had found her through a real estate attorney in Nashville. Not through anyone Renee knew, not through anyone in our shared circle. I had Carol witness and record a detailed affidavit of ownership history for the duplex. Purchase date, purchase price, full accounting of the funding sources, my military service record attached. Signed, dated, notarized, and filed with the county recorder's office before I boarded my plane. I was not building a trap. I was protecting an asset the same way I would secure a position before leaving it. Because a man going into a war zone should not leave his flanks exposed. I did not tell Renee I was going to Huntsville that day. I told her I was visiting a friend from my unit. She did not ask which friend. The person who helped me understand what to do with what I had built was Beverly Okafor. I found her through a veterans legal assistance network 3 weeks after I returned, and I drove to her Nashville office on a Wednesday morning with the folder Sandra had given me and the envelope from my duffel and the specific practice composure of a man who has already decided that emotion is not going to be useful in this particular room. Beverly's office was not designed for impression. It was designed for work. One full wall of filing, case law binders arranged by year and jurisdiction, a whiteboard on the adjacent wall with a case timeline written in red marker that I could not fully read from where I was sitting. She reviewed the folder without reacting to it, not because she wasn't troubled by what it showed, but because she had seen this configuration before, the specific architecture betrayal, and she was already past the stage of being moved by it and inside the stage of building the response. She asked about the notary. I slid the envelope across her desk. She opened it, read the contents, looked up at me, and allowed herself one expression that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. She asked how long I had had it. I told her since 6 months before deployment. She wrote one word on her legal pad and underlined it twice. I could not see the word from where I was sitting. Then she closed the file and looked at me with the directness of someone who does not use softening language because she respects the person she is talking to too much. She said, "They built their entire case on the assumption that you weren't watching. That assumption is a gift. We don't open it until the right moment." I drove home understanding that I had the right person. I saw Todd Phelps for the first time in person about a month before the hearing. It was not planned. I was at a gas station outside Clarksville, and he was at the pump next to me, leased BMW. Dressed well for a Tuesday, phone pressed his ear with the practiced ease of a man who has cultivated the appearance of being in demand. Renee was in the passenger seat. She saw me. She went absolutely still. Todd didn't know who I was yet. He finished his call, pumped his gas, and got back in the car without looking up from his phone. Renee watched me across the parking lot the entire time with an expression I recognized immediately. Not guilt, not shame, but calculation. She was already managing the optics of the moment, already constructing the narrative she would tell herself and Stokes about what my presence there meant. I bought a water inside and drove away. What I narrated to myself on that drive was not about Todd. Todd was irrelevant. What I understood watching Renee across that parking lot was that she had never made a decision based on love. She had made a transaction. She had looked at our marriage, looked at our assets, looked at the version of her future she wanted, and she had made a transaction, trading one configuration for another the way her father had taught her to think about real estate. The problem with transactions is that they are documented. Every movement of money, every deed transfer, every LLC registration date, every drain account, all of it documented, all of it dated, all of it waiting. The hearing was at Montgomery County Circuit Court in Clarksville. The courtroom was fluorescent lit and functional, the kind of space where outcomes are determined by paperwork rather than performance. Gerald Stokes, Renee's attorney, Germantown-born, used to winning on procedural volume, had filed 12 motions and was presenting the quitclaim deed as a valid instrument under Tennessee Marital Property Code. He was confident in the way that men are confident when they have been given incomplete information and told it was complete. His case was structurally sound given what he knew. What he didn't know was the foundation he was building on. Beverly had made 2 small objections in the morning session, both overruled, and had otherwise sat beside me making occasional notes on her legal pad with the focused patience of a surgeon monitoring vitals. I watched Stokes watch her, and I watched him interpret her stillness as a weak hand. That was his second significant error of the day. Beverly checked her phone once, briefly, under the table. She wrote a single line on her legal pad and slid it to me without looking up. I read it. I slid it back. Then she wrote the time at the top of the page and circled it. 22 minutes. I did not know what happened in 22 minutes. I sat with that number and kept my face still. Judge Carol Whitfield had the floor for the setup, and she read with the specific silence of someone who does not perform authority because she already possesses it. She was a former Army JAG lieutenant colonel, and she had been on the bench for 22 years, and there was nothing in Gerald Stokes' presentation that she had not seen a version of before. When Beverly asked to introduce one additional piece of documentation in connection with the notarization of the deed, Judge Whitfield granted it without comment, and a clerk carried a folder to the bench. I narrated to myself what was about to happen, not with satisfaction, but with the particular sensation of watching something built in the dark finally come into the light. I thought about the drive to Huntsville 6 months before deployment. I thought about Carol Sims at the duplex, the way she had been professional and unhurried, the way she had verified my identity against my military ID and my service record, and had signed the affidavit with the clean authority of someone who understood exactly what the document was for. I thought about the duffel bag sitting on Renee's kitchen floor. I thought about how she had watched me set it down with care and read that care as something small. Judge Whitfield opened the folder. Stokes leaned slightly forward. The room held its breath. Then Whitfield spoke, and she spoke in the measured register of someone delivering a finding, not a verdict yet, but finding, the kind that makes verdicts inevitable. She stated that the notarized affidavit predated the quitclaim transfer by 6 months and established sole contribution to the purchase price of the Huntsville property. She stated that the signature on the deed did not match the signature on file in the affidavit or in my military service records. She stated she was formally noting that discrepancy for the record and referring it to the district attorney's office for review on the question of fraud in a real estate transfer. She paused. Stokes's left hand would have been still on the table the way hands get when someone is managing more tension than their face is showing, was now flat and pressing down slightly, as if steadying something that wanted to move. Renee was looking at the back of Beverly's head. What I felt in that moment was not what people expect me to say I felt. I did not feel vindicated. I did not feel the clean release of a man who has been proven right. What I felt was grief, specific, honest grief for the version of Renee that I had married, who had been real in the first year, who had sat with me on the porch of the Clarksville house the week we moved in and talked about what we were going to build together. That woman had made a decision at some point. I don't know exactly when, maybe before I even left the third deployment, maybe earlier, that the future she wanted required a different transaction than the one she had made with me. And she had acted on that decision with a thoroughness that told me it had not been impulsive. It had been chosen. I mourned that, quietly, inside that fluorescent-lit courtroom, while Stokes was leaning forward and Renee was staring at Beverly's head, and Judge Whitfield was closing the folder. I let myself feel the specific weight of 7 years ending in a room with bad lighting and a clerk who was already reaching for the next document. Then I put it down. Not away. Down. The way you set something carefully on a surface when you know you will need to come back to it, but not right now. Renee turned and looked at me. It was the first time she had looked directly at me since the hearing began. The calculation was gone from her face. The practiced composure, the strategic modesty she had dressed herself in for this room, all of it had come apart at the seams in the 30 seconds since Whitfield had said the word fraud. What was left was just a woman who had made a very large error and had just finished understanding the full size of it. She did not speak. I held her gaze for a moment and then looked away. The recess hallway was quiet in a particular way courthouse hallways are quiet, contained, carpeted, everything slightly louder than it should be because the silence is so deliberate. I drank water from a paper cup and listened to the voicemail my mother had left that morning. Sandra's voice was plain and unhurried. She said my father used to say that the land doesn't know who's worried about it. It just sits there waiting for the person who deserves it to come back. I listened to it twice. I thought about the porch on Meridian Street. I thought about the photograph Sandra had found in the garage during my visit. Me and my father at 12 years old, both of us holding paintbrushes, the front porch freshly painted behind us. She had sat on the railing post next to me without saying a word about it, and I had looked at it for a moment and gone back to fixing the railing, and I had left it there when I came inside, and later Sandra had framed it and put it on the mantel above the fireplace where my father used to stand. Beverly came over and told me Stokes would recommend settlement before the afternoon session because the fraud referrer had changed the calculus entirely. Renee's legal exposure was now significantly larger than the value of the asset in dispute. She told me to be prepared for a conversation before the afternoon session began. I said I was prepared. Then I said, not really to Beverly, almost the hallway itself, that my father painted that house with me when I was 12. Every board. Every rail. Beverly looked at me for a moment and did not respond. She understood that some things are said to be said, not answered. The afternoon session was Beverly's. She stood. The first time in the entire hearing, she had stood by choice rather than protocol, and she began with the affidavit, and she walked the room to the timeline the way you walk someone through a map. This point here, this point next, this is where the deed diverges from documented fact. She used the word inconsistent the way surgeons use exact language, not because they are avoiding the more violent word, but because precision causes more damage than volume. She moved through the LLC registration timeline, the financial trail of the sale proceeds, the joint account drawdown, the transaction dates. She did not raise her voice once. She was building a structure in that courtroom, designed to hold weight after everyone had gone home. Stokes objected twice. Both overruled. After the second, Renee touched her own collarbone, one finger, briefly. Then her hand returned to her lap. The gesture lasted less than a second. Beverly did not react to it. I saw it. I filed it. Beverly cited my deployment dates against the signing date on the deed. She presented the physical impossibility of my presence at the notarization. She presented Carol Sims's sworn testimony regarding the identity verification conducted 6 months prior. Then she sat down with the same unhurried quality she had brought to every other moment in that room. I thought about what my father said on that August Saturday on the Meridian Street porch. He said it was not really about the land. The land was a test. The real inheritance was the understanding that what you build with discipline and patience cannot be taken from you by someone who confused your patience for permission. He said quiet men who pay attention are almost never as unprepared as the room assumes. I was 12 years old when he said it. I have been building toward it ever since. The settlement was signed 2 weeks later. The Huntsville duplex was returned to my sole ownership. The drained joint account was subject to a repayment order structured over 36 months. The district attorney's fraud review was ongoing and separated from the divorce proceedings, which meant it was not finished, only moved to a different room. Renee signed without looking at me. Stokes had advised her to sign, and she had listened to him. Finally, on the one occasion when listening would not help her, 6 weeks after that, I was sitting on the porch at my mother's house in Huntsville, on the section of railing I had repaired during that Saturday visit before the hearing. The photograph was inside on the mantel above the fireplace. The evening was warm and the neighborhood was quiet in the way Huntsville neighborhoods get quiet after dinner. Dogs inside, sprinklers off, the particular stillness of a weeknight in a place where people wake up early. Patricia Wynn was in the second lawn chair. She had coffee. She had been my neighbor on the Clarksville Street for 3 years, a widow, a former Marine who had lost her husband to a training accident and had gone on living with the specific dignity of someone who has decided that loss will not become identity. She had watched the entire unraveling from 2 houses down and had said nothing because she understood that some things have to complete themselves before they can be addressed. She was asking me about a property she was considering in Columbus, Georgia, near where she grew up. She wanted to know what I looked for when I evaluated whether something was worth investing in. I was listening with the full attention I give things I am genuinely interested in, which told me something important about where I was. I thought about Renee standing in that kitchen, telling me to take what fit in my bag. I thought about her voice, the precision of it, the way she had aimed it at the specific thing she thought would reduce me, the accusation that I had never really been present, that my patience was indistinguishable from absence. She was wrong about the word. I was always present. I was watching everything she was doing from the moment the first sign appeared. I drove to Huntsville alone and retained a notary and filed an affidavit and carried the documentation home in a duffel bag from a deployment because I am the son of a man who taught me that the ground under your feet is the only thing permanent in this life, and that the person who holds a deed holds something that cannot be manufactured again. The land doesn't know who's worried about it. It just sits there waiting for the person who deserves it to come back. I came back.